The Republican Senate primary to take on Senator Jeanne Shaheen next year is well underway, but there is a bit of a holding pattern as former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski decides whether he's going to jump into the race. In the meantime, the other candidates are busy trying to build support, and the one with the most well-known conservative record joins us here this morning on Close-Up, former House Speaker Bill O'Brien.
Good morning, Adam.
Thanks
I appreciate you having me in.
So you're friends with Corey Lewandowski, and he's a bit of a wild card right now. He's saying he's not going to make a decision until the end of the year. Even though you're friends, do you think he has to decide sooner than that in order not to injure the potential, the eventual nominee if he's not going to run?
Well, I think more importantly, voters in New Hampshire, and particularly in the Republican primary, appreciate people who come and talk to them. You know, you can't campaign from Washington. You have to campaign in the community center in Peterborough and the community room at the town hall in Merrimack. You have to talk to voters. You know, just as we hear voters say, for example, that I can't, in New Hampshire, I won't vote for a presidential candidate unless I've met him 3 times. They certainly expect to have their senatorial candidates in front of them answering questions, explaining who they are.
If he decides to get in, how do you make the case that you would be the most effective senator to work with President Donald Trump?
Look, at one of the candidates, if he does come in, it'll be 4 candidates. Only one of them has ever been elected to any office at all. Only one of them has actually proven himself as a conservative, and that is me. You know, you can't come to New Hampshire with a fat checkbook and figure I'm going to parachute in here. In the case of one candidate, when he couldn't even qualify to be a state representative candidate based on residency requirements. You don't go to Washington to get permission to run for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire. You have to be here, and as I said, you have to be meeting the voters as I'm meeting the voters. You have to truly have the grassroots campaign that we're putting together. I'm the proven conservative in the race, and that's not going to change.
You are a constitutional conservative, and to you the Constitution is paramount. The president recently made some comments calling the emoluments clause of the Constitution, quote, phony. And Republicans like to laugh this stuff off and say it's no big deal. But as a constitutional conservative, do you worry when any president denigrates part of the Constitution, specifically that constrains his power?
Well, I don't take those remarks as a denigration of the Constitution. What I do see him is saying that the way that clause is being misinterpreted is phony. We've had presidents in the past who have been very wealthy as well. George Washington, our first president, was very wealthy, and the produce of his farms were being sold to British trading houses. No one came forward and said that was a violation of the Constitution. I think President Trump was justifiably expressing frustration at an ongoing search of ways to impeach him that began the day after he was elected. It's been a phony quest, and the reasons to do it are phony.
We mentioned your conservative record previously, and you brought it up as well. You were only in power for 2 years at the State House, but that really shaped the rest of the decade policy-wise. Take us through, though, what do you think in your tenure was the biggest mistake you made? How did you learn from that, and how are you applying that in this race?
Well, I think the biggest mistake I made was certainly not explaining as much as we could to the people of New Hampshire why we were doing things, not explaining the fiscal crisis we are in that necessitated the almost 20% in spending cuts that we had to put in place. You know, you get up to the State House and you assume that the reality that is so stark there and that you're trying to address is evident to everyone, and I think most people, as we know, aren't paying attention to what is going on in Washington all the time or the State House all the time, and I would have liked to have done a better job in explaining it.
Certainly voter attention spans are not great, but now we live in an era where, you know, the president on Twitter, it's happening, you know, weekends, nights, it's all over the place. So how do you get voters to pay attention to that record that you have from 2011 to 2013 if it's hard to grab their attention with stuff happening today?
One voter at a time, and that's why I'm talking about the need for the other candidates in the Republican primary to develop the rapport that I think I do have with voters, and particularly the Republican voters in New Hampshire. I've been talking to them now since before I became Speaker. They understand that I'm the proven conservative in this race. You can't have your race run out of Washington, go to Washington first and get permission to run in the U.S. Senate. You really have to be meeting meeting them one-on-one. You have to have the meetings that I'm having every night with supporters where they're saying, what can we do for you, Bill, and going out and doing things.
One of the big debates while you were Speaker was over higher education funding. If you're in the U.S. Senate, what are you going to do to try and make college more affordable?
One of the things we're going to do is stop throwing all the money at universities. We continue to subsidize college tuitions, and it causes them to go up. There's been so many instances where the federal government, thinking it's doing the right thing in subsidizing college tuitions, has just caused them to skyrocket. Another thing I'd like to do is to put in place a provision in federal tuition guarantee loan program to say that universities that take them, if their graduates aren't getting jobs that allow them to pay back those loans, then the universities have to kick in and pay off those loans. You know, the higher education gravy train has to come to an end, and the way it's going to come to an end is by having the universities stop being unquestioned recipients of these funds and building these hierarchies of overspending, but instead educate our children, get them to the point where they have great jobs, and if they're not achieving that, then give back the money to the federal government.
College campuses are often a great source of volunteers for campaigns, and I'm sure you've been making that outreach already, and we'll probably be bringing on a lot of those younger folks next year as the campaign builds out. But I'm curious, if you have students on your campaign who are from out of state, are you going to be encouraging them to not vote in the New Hampshire Senate primary in September, instead say, hey, you should be voting in your home state?
You know, there's a certain logic to voting and that most people understand, and unfortunately not all the judges in New Hampshire. And that logic is you should vote where you reside. You should vote where your decisions are going to play out in your lives, not in the lives of someone else. And I think the young folks that I talk to, just as I did when I was young, vote where we live. And don't try to do what I heard one young woman up Dartmouth say, which was, you know, I should be voting in California, but my vote has more impact in New Hampshire. That's not fair to the people of New Hampshire, who should have a right to choose their own representation. You know, I believe in what President Trump said about who should influence races in New Hampshire. It should be New Hampshire voters.
And yet, is it fair to that student, though, member of the college Republicans who's here, who's invested in the race, really wants, working hard for you, knows the issues, you still think they shouldn't be voting here?
And so if they think of all these issues, those things, then they certainly want to become a resident of New Hampshire. I encourage them to become a resident of New Hampshire. I encourage them to register their vehicles here, get licenses here. Join us as the decisions that they are participating in making play themselves out.
Does your potential race against Jeanne Shaheen get easier if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren is the Democratic nominee for president?
Well, you know, I look at all the presidential candidates over there, and each one of them is so far out of the mainstream that you could choose anyone and say it makes the job of getting elected a U.S. senator as a conservative in New Hampshire much easier. You know, certainly Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders are just way out of the mainstream and are going to shock New Hampshire voters when they start turning their attention to the things that they're suggesting. The huge overspending, $52 trillion to put in place universal health care that will take our decisions away from ourselves and our doctors, but put them in the hands of government bureaucrats in terms of what care we can get. When they come across and focus in on things like that, sure, it's going to be easier to say, no, let's turn back to conservative solutions.
All right, Speaker O'Brien, thanks for joining us on Close Up.
Thank you.
We appreciate the time.
Appreciate it, Anna.